Hi, this is Paul. By the reaction I see on Twitter and YouTube, you'd think Jesus came again, but it's just Wesley Huff on Joe Rogan. It's quite remarkable the impact that this had. I never heard of the guy until I heard something about that little dust up over that debate that someone tried. Again, Streisand effect, all that, and that's where the thing started. I've watched the whole thing. I don't really watch a lot of Rogan. But I did watch the whole thing just yesterday as I was doing some work, keeping it in the background. I got a bunch of thoughts on it, and then I want to get at what I found most interesting about it. So let's start here. Um, Huff didn't really say much original, and I said that to Paul Anleitner's question on Twitter, and he said, "Yeah, but remember what one of the things that I said is most of the stuff I've heard." Has been very much around moderate evangelical circles for a very long time. A lot of the stuff that you learn in seminary, and oh, that's great. That's not a knock. I want to be clear about that. He didn't have to say anything original. In fact, in some ways, part of the power of the presentation was that almost everything that he said has just been what many decently educated paying attention Christians have known for a very long time. And the fact that it's somehow new to a lot of people means, well, it probably needed to be said. So I didn't really hear anything dramatic or different, but I thought Huff, what do we call him? Huff was exactly the right guy. I thought he was pitch perfect. He was humble. He was sincere. He was genuine. He was calm. He was well spoken. He was authoritative. And he's a fit young man, exactly the kind of person that's going to have a degree of authority on Rogan. I mean, if you had sort of a crusty 70-year-old retired seminary professor from some Midwestern moderate evangelical seminary, first of all, he'd never get on Joe Rogan. And secondly, he wouldn't have come across anywhere near as persuasively or, dare I say, winsomely or attractively as Wesley Huff. It was a tremendous, tremendous performance. And I thought in terms of hitting the demographic that is sort of making everybody go crazy. Bang, nailed it. Really good. Really, really good. So again, just because I say there wasn't really anything new, it's not a knock. He just sort of presented the stuff that, and the kind of arguments that, again, you will find almost in any moderate evangelical setting. It wasn't, that's exactly where it was. Now, Rogan is clearly moving in terms of what he thinks and where he's at. And Rogan, like I said, I've obviously watched a variety of episodes over the years, but I don't watch him regularly. I pretty much watch him when I see stuff blow up around him. But he's the embodiment of an archetype, almost the first dude of the zeitgeist. I mean, you can see the culture moving by watching Joe, and just watching this just kind of had an amazement at the embodiment of both the everyman and someone who's paid a lot of attention to the internet, and someone who thinks, and someone who has his own opinions. And so again, there's a reason Joe Rogan has achieved what he has. And people, especially in political sentences, sort of want to dismiss him. But he's really good at he's really good at what he does. And especially if you understand that what he does. And again, he's sort of the archetypal everyman. He is the, what did I say? He's the first dude of the zeitgeist. That's really who he is. One of the, I think, why such a, again, it's almost the second coming of Jesus in terms of how a certain element of Christian YouTube and Twitter are just falling all over themselves and doing one heck of a victory lap about this. It's really phenomenal. And I think it's, number one, people love representation. And so, if you get tired of all the other sort of forms of representation that you see in media, it's helpful to remember that you like it too. And so when people see whatever they sort of identify with sort of on a big screen or a big platform, and they get all excited or they get really grabby about getting their however they identify as sort of the core of who they are represented in a movie or on TV or in something like that, when they feel seen, well, guess what? Male, Christian, demographics, 25 to 45 like being seen too, and I just see that with the I mean some of these YouTube channels, they're just going crazy. It's it's quite interesting to watch. But my thoughts on this is there's a deep feeling of a nostalgic paradise lost among evangelicals, and this is hardly a new point either. And I think actually I was watching. Oh, Paul Anleitner is making a point about the thing that I'm making a point about.
Something Wesley Huff mentioned yesterday in his conversation with Joe Rogan, which, by the way,
Paul's all dressed up. Must be really cold in Minnesota. Not nearly so cold here in Sacramento.
Wesley, awesome job, man. I mean, it was so great to see real biblical scholarship presented on the Joe Rogan Experience, and kudos to Joe.
Yeah, see, again, moderate evangelical. Now, let me get back to where I was going. A couple of people have sent this video to me from the Dispatch with Jonathan Rauch talking to what's his name? Goldberg, right? Jonah Goldberg, is that him? I think so. He's from the Dispatch crew, and boy, there's a lot going on in this video, and it's very interesting. Where, I mean, this is sort of the utilitrad. We really need evangelical Christian churches to do better, but don't do what you did in the last few elections, okay? We really want you to sort of be out there and feel strong enough and secure enough to sort of stabilize the culture, but don't vote for Donald Trump. I mean, that's basically the heart of it. And, I'm an atheist, gay, East Coast reporter elite, but I really want all the evangelical monkeys to stay in their cage and please stick to the old time religion before you got into politics, okay? That's kind of what we want you to do for the culture. So, the dude's, it's almost, boy, he's wearing two shirts. It's like back to college in the 1980s. I remember at Calvin, the preppies would wear like the Izod shirt on the inside, and then the super interesting. Anyway, where was I going with respect to that? And the collapse of the main line sent a lot of people to evangelicalism, and there is just a sense of WASPy lost America, and that's really in some ways Rauch's point, that he's really at one point, maybe I can find it. It was right here where I stopped listening. Here we go.
So another problem with what they're saying is they don't have an alternative to propose. Mm-hmm. The founder's vision.
Now he's talking about the post-liberal, and I think actually a lot of his critiques of the post-liberals are correct in that they sort of want to go all the way back. Let's make Latin Christendom great again. Let's make Constantinople great again. But exactly how? It's sort of like my response to Doug Wilson up there in Moscow, Idaho. It's like, call me when you get to Boise. The project that it's just such an interesting talk, in that on one hand, sort of takes the classic decrying Constantinople. Well, anyway, so he's critiquing the post-liberals like Deanan and Amari, he keeps moving too. But the post liberals that just say, oh, it all went wrong with liberalism. We need to get back to before liberalism. And okay.
Was you'd have secular liberalism processes and some of the ethos that goes along with that. And that would be supported by generally supportive religious institutions. And you'd need to keep those in alignment. And that still seems to me the only way to make things work. Because I don't think that the post-liberals have any idea how to run a modern, complicated, multifactional, multi-ethnic, pluralistic, fast-changing society. And they've never even told us how they want to run it. They just say things like, well, we'll have to recapture all the cultural institutions, as if you can make the left or the center left or people like me, just go away. So they have nothing to offer. As far as I can tell, it's actually practical. And then a third complaint I have about them, or whatever number I'm on, is that they want to blame people like me, the secular atheist homosexuals, for the decline of Christianity. And okay, I'll take some of the blame for that, and I do in this book. I say, folks like me need to be more friendly and understanding and supportive of the importance of faith, both to people's lives and to our democracy. But what those guys over there, what the post-liberals are doing, is basically shifting the blame to us for what I see as their failures. Mm-hmm. It was not my fault that the mainline churches drifted away from teaching the Bible and into the social gospel and got themselves politicized and secularized to the point where a lot of people felt you go to church and it just wasn't offering really much spirituality or much real teaching. And it certainly wasn't my fault that in the 1970s, starting with Falwell and then accelerating rapidly under Reagan and then reaching extraordinary new heights under Trump and MAGA, that the white evangelical church turned itself into more or less a functional auxiliary of the right wing of the Republican Party. I didn't do that. They did that. And so what I want to tell my friends, the post-liberals, is if you want to understand why people are abandoning the church in droves, you might start by looking in the mirror and looking at some of the choices that the church has made over the last 50 years and comparing the frightened, angry, embattled tone of what so many evangelicals are saying in public life and what they're supporting, comparing that with the teachings of Jesus. So the three pillars of Christianity that people seem to agree are essential, go something like, first, don't be afraid. Do not approach life from a posture of fear. God is looking out for us and has a plan. Second, be like Jesus. Imitate him. His concern for the weak, his egalitarianism. And number three, forgive each other. It is God's job to judge, not...
Now the number two is always sort of the be like Jesus, and it's like, Jesus is a really complicated dude, In his, actually, I guess if Freddie can promote Pepsi, I can promote Jim Boy's Tacos. Actually, I had to go and get some keys made for the church, and there was a Jim Boy's along the way, and I just love the Jim Boy's fish tacos. They're getting really expensive, but I just love the Jim Boy's fish tacos. It's the only food I like at Jim Boy's, actually, is the fish tacos. So just putting it out there, Rick and I would get Jim Boy's Tacos back before Rick got his day job back and left me all alone at Livingstone's church all by myself on Friday. But the interesting thing, again, is that he recognizes that a lot of what led up to this is the fall of the main line, because sort of his point here is that it's white Protestants, it's the secularization of white Protestants in America that has led to the political dynamics that he takes issue with. Now, again, that just throws y'all into all of the political turbulence, but there's a lot of nostalgia about that. I think this is from the long decline of the main line and the retreat into fundamentalism, neo-evangelicalism. In some ways, it's worse among Catholics and Orthodox who had major civilizations and then lost their platformed formal preeminence. See the popes during World War II. Those were fascinating. Those two books were just fascinating in terms of getting my mind around how on earth a Pope Pius the oh shoot did I get I don't want to get them right. Was it the 11th? These popes could sort of align with Mussolini because they wanted to make Italy Catholic again. Because they had lost the Papal States and they had just been losing, and so it was not a good move. And that, of course, leads to Vatican II, where they embraced democracy, because once they fascism wasn't the way forward. Clearly, communism, which is why they sort of retreated into fascism, and then democracy then seemed to be the best only option. And by that point, of course, the American Catholic Church was already a significant source of revenue for Rome. And so then in Vatican II, they have to finally embrace democracy. But if you look at what some pre-Vatican II popes had to say about democracy and liberalism, well, it's pretty stark. Whereas waspy Protestants in America long saw liberalism and the kind of religious pluralism in America as a very positive thing. And of course, that's a much bigger, longer thing. And so then to win Joe Rogan feels like making America great again, or making America waspy again. But again, this is Joe Rogan. And he might have sort of moved away from new atheism, but he's a pretty liberal guy. And again, watching the left try to smear Joe Rogan, it's like, dude, the people who watch Joe Rogan know who Joe Rogan is. He's not putting up any facade here. He again is the archetypal. He is the archetypal dude, the first dude of the zeitgeist. And he is who he is. On the other hand, the culture is not the same as it was. Aaron Wrenn wrote a great piece, I think it was for the Christian Post, on how Trump is like the negative world president. He made the point that, I should probably pull it up so I can remember to put it in the links. Yeah, here it is. Donald Trump is the president for post-Christian America. He could only get elected to the presidency in a negative world. Talks about Bill Clinton, Gary Hart. Trump is a casino owner. Just today, Cale Zeldin put something on Twitter which doesn't get just basically talking about the mainstreaming of gambling, prostitution in America. I mean, OnlyFans is functionally digital prostitution. It's what it is. And how his culture, all of this. It's a great piece. I'll put the link in the show notes. The culture is not the same, and it probably wasn't what you imagined it used to be anyway. Nostalgia is about wringing meaning out of the past, but it tends to distort. It's an important and powerful psychological pleasure, but never terribly clear-eyed. Point number 4, takeaway from this. Modern evangelicalism is far from dead. Huff put on a display of why it remains as potent a force as it does. Let's see. There we go. That's so you can read it if you want to. It's a crowdsourced. It's a crowdsourced least common denominator Protestantism, and isn't going away. It can play in our culture still, along with a lot of normies. There's a lot of excitement about this ortho moment and the trad moment, and that's true. But a lot of that is on YouTube and on Twitter and on Substack. But when you get down to people who have jobs, who have families, and don't have enough time and aren't terribly on the internet, modern evangelicalism, it's got a lot of play in it. Don't count it out. And I think that's part of what we saw here, is that Huff is very much moderate evangelical, all the way down the line. Rogan is searching. He's trying to put things together. He researched Huff. One person sent me and said, didn't Rogan said that he spent 30 hours watching Huff in preparation for this? Now that could have been partly because, putting on, was it Billy Carson? Is that the guy's name? Might have felt a little exposed, and Rogan took a lot of heat for putting on, let's say, counter-narrative voices during COVID scandal and election. And so Rogan's under some pressure to not sort of make make mistakes in terms of putting on someone that's going to be sort of, I mean, he is sort of the first dude of the zeitgeist, and so you don't really want to, you want to do a little bit of research, even if as you maintain your dudeness. So he researched us, but I think part of it is too, I think Jordan Peterson pushed him off this. New atheism is dying fast, and Joe is a guy with a lot of common sense, and so he's watched and he's listened and he's got good intuitions about a lot of stuff, and it's like that's going away. And so again, the sort of swinging back towards religion. It was interesting this is the problem of watching something that I'm not actually talking about much in this. Roush is big on, more organized religion, and I've been reading, I just put that book away, Wuthnow's Restructuring of American Religion, and we've been moving away from institutional. Evangelicalism was always about alternative institutions. It was sort of leaving I'll pull up the quotes. This book was published in 1988, Restructuring of American Religious Institutions, and it begins with terribly boring. Here it is. Marchers filed past the review standing hour after hour. The day was Thursday, June 6, 1946. The place, Prospect Park in Brooklyn, New York. 2 years to the day since the Allies landed in Normandy beaches, and the nation now paused to give thanks and reflect on its collective heritage. But the marchers were not soldiers or war heroes. They were children, little girls in starched pinafores wearing white dress gloves and carrying bouquets of spring flowers, little boys in neatly ironed white shirts with clip-on bow ties and paper hats. Together they marched, accompanied by brass bands and floats, rows past of admiring parents and grandparents. In the reviewing stand, Brooklyn's mayor, the governor of New York, and a justice from the U.S. Supreme Court gave their approval. It's so funny when people talk about Christian nationalism today. It's like, do you read any history? Good grief, people. This stuff is not hard to find. This was the culture in the 1940s and 50s. That was, and this was embraced. Oh, this was exactly what we have to get away from. Together they marched, accompanied by brass bands. By public declaration, all schools were closed that day, and all approximately 90,000 students participated. The year was the 117th annual Sunday School Union Parade. Little more than a decade later, the world of the Brooklyn Sunday School Parade seemed strangely out of place. More than the differences in dress or even location, the idea of thousands of people turning out for a Sunday school parade taxes the imagination. That event should enlist broad support from local officials and involve closing of public schools seems even less imaginable. It's helpful in terms of, even in Brooklyn, the scenario of rampant secularization fails to square with the facts. Contrary to the image of decaying neighborhoods and ecclesiastical flight, the number of churches in the 1980s is actually 10% higher than in the 1940s. Church membership has held as a percentage of the borough's population, and membership in theologically most conservative churches has risen fivefold. Now, that doesn't necessarily undermine the great dechurching that has been happening. But, and this was, Roman Catholic schools were strong. And part of the point that he makes is that this was deeply institutional. Impressed with thousands of churches that had played so prominent a role in providing services to their community, Douglas was sufficiently foresighted to predict that much of the work of the private institutions now in the hands of the church shall in the future pass over to the state, which is exactly what had happened. But a big piece of this is that religion in America was deeply institutional in a way in the 1940s that would change quite a bit when you got into the 1980s. And that would sort of this move away from staid denominations, the power of the main line, Methodist, the United Methodist Church then was this massive church. Southern Baptists were second, and then Presbyterians were third. Episcopalians were fourth. Roman Catholics were large. So these Christianity was well within ecclesiastical institutions. And what happens in terms of the move towards neo-evangelical and eventually now towards the metagelical is that it's moving away from ecclesiastical institutions and starts going into goes into parachurch and then sort of into privatized startup ad hoc institutions and sort of living in these scenes on social media and other cyber platforms. I'd love for this to debunk Protestant presentational idolatry. What do I mean by Protestant presentational idolatry? If we can only get in front of Joe Rogan and say the magic words, then what? I mean, I can't think of a better, more appropriate, spot-on presentation than what Wesley Huff did. It was, maybe you want Mackey from the Bible Project. I don't care who you pick. But people aren't that way. Joe Rogan called him in some ways as a tool for Joe's own discovery. Now, where that's going to go, I think it's going to be far stranger, longer. It's just like imagining Jordan Peterson was going to pop 7 years ago. Nope, hasn't popped yet. And you might want to look at what you think of as popping, because things are changing. Things are moving. Christians are going to look different. And again, I'm old enough to remember that Christians in the age of my grandparents looked different than Christians from baby boomers, and they look different, and they're going to look different from millennials and Gen Zs. Now, how that's going to impact institutions and churches, well, that is yet to be seen. So this Protestant presentational idolatry, and maybe because I'm a Calvinist, but these are deep tensions even in my own denomination, because a denomination that ostensibly had a confessional standard that said basically it's the Holy Spirit alone that makes Christians, yet doggone it, we sure do try hard with our Christian schools and our catechesis and our formation. It's very interesting tensions. Joe wants to match Huff with a skeptic. And again, this is part of Joe's research project, but my expectations are low. He could bring on Alex O'Connor. And again, Huff didn't really present anything new. It might have been new to Joe or seen by Joe in a new light. And again, this gets back to the point of, I can see why these publishers send me books, because if a book colonizes me, if I start to like a book, I'm going to sell the shit out of it. I'm sorry to use the S word. I know some of my audience don't like it, but when I get excited about a book, I get excited about a book, and I'm excited about this book. I think Spencer did an amazing job in it. And part of what that gets at, again, is sort of the transjective quality of this. Because of the way Joe's program works, a number of years ago, Huff wouldn't be on it. It only took sort of this dust up to have Huff be noticed. And, this is the work of God and providence, and however you want to frame it with your own confessional language. But it's also the fact that Joe Rogan is kind of in the right place for now. Huff is going to be compelling to him. So it's not just the presentation, it's the moment has to be there. And now, but again, Huff didn't present anything incredibly new, and much of the stuff has been trod back and forth by this Christian, non-Christian skeptic debates for a very long time. So, but again, what Joe would get out of it, I don't know. I hope he has Huff back. I hope he brings somebody else on. But Alex O'Connor, he's heard all of these things before, and he has reasons why he still doesn't believe. Now there are moments in here. Maybe I should get my Joe Rogan. I know a bunch of you know how to kind of get clips onto YouTube of Joe Rogan past the blockers, but change the speed, yada yada yada. I don't have time to mess with all this. So I'll just use this Joe Rogan. But this is I've got the I can't put them on camera because sometimes the camera then likes to focus on the face. Anyway, so I did a transcript instead of the salient parts. It comes way at the end where they really start, I think, getting into it. And this is Rogan. And I think most of what it means to be a human being in a meaningful way is not measurable. Most of it, love and friendship and community, these things are not very measurable. They're very strange. And I think this is part of where Joe is moving. He's moving beyond new atheism along the lines of recognizing that the picture of the world that reductive materialism offers is a very impoverished picture. So, and then he talks about human beings, that love connection, whatever love is, whatever good is, it's a very real thing. And it seems to not exist, certainly not in the volume with other animals that exist and that it exists in us. There's obviously nurturing in other animals. They nurture their loved ones, but their perception of life and death and all is very different from ours. So it leads me to why is our version of life so much more rich and complicated than other beings that exist? Why do we have this insatiable desire to learn and to know more? So you can see sort of the, it was rationality rules that always sort of greeted us as though we're apes. Well, And Joe's basically saying, I don't think the monkey thing. I mean, he also, the reason I picked the monkey for him was this is how he used to refer to himself sometime. Oh, I'm just a dumb ape or something like that. And of course, Joe Rogan is not a dumb ape, but I bought him. He sits on my shelf. This little fella's kind of cute. So, hey. And of course, Grim Grizz is going to clip the heck out of this thing. But he's just noticing, what is man that you are mindful of him? So it leads to, we kind of know it, and we don't know it, and it's just, you can't measure it. Glenn Scrivener and Speak Life just clipped out all the wows. And I think part of the reason he had Huff on is because he's looking to make sense of what he's piecing together and what's dawning on him. And so, not just a monkey anymore. They talked about new atheists. They don't like that. It makes them feel dumb to believe it. It makes them feel dumb even to speculate it, Even to just say, what do you think happens after you die? Like, even that conversation is like, people don't like that. Nothing. Go on. Go into the darkness. It's over. That's it. People don't like that. And that's a point I make often, that I do funerals, and I know there are plenty of atheists that go to these funerals. They're friends of church people who die, but they don't stand up. They're much better behaved than to stand up and say, "Oh, you pastor, you think they're with loved ones and with the Lord and all of these things. That's a bunch of crap. They're just gone." People don't say that at funerals. They got more sense than that. So Rogan is clearly moving away from reductive materialism, and then this section really caught me. So then Huff sort of turns it out. And then now, right at the end, Huff is probably figuring, we're getting to 3 hours now. I gotta make the big turn. I gotta ask the big question. I gotta put Joe on the spot now. I thought, where were we? I thought Pete made a great point on Twitter. One of the elements of the Joe Rogan Wesley Huff interview is the backdrop of Christian response. Moving forward, the church needs to know how to operate in a digital space. The reaction is Wes Huff confronts Joe Rogan, and then of course put the big concerned or the feared or the big YouTube thumbnail face on the video. And way to go. Go after Christian YouTube, Pete. You do it. You do it. Please. If you can win, I'd really appreciate it. Where was I? So he asked the question. So in all of this, what do you think of Jesus? Like in terms of your own life journey and trying to find an answer to ultimate questions, what do you think of the historic person of Jesus? Because a lot of the presentation was sort of as a historian and saying, Jesus isn't simply a myth. He's a real person. Well, it certainly seems like there's a lot of people that believe that there is a very exceptional human being that existed. So the question is, what does that mean? And what does it mean that he's the Son of God? And my hand's getting warm. So, Joe, you'll have to sit in the chair with Spencer's book. That is a question that is not asked or thought about nearly enough. Because obviously in the ancient world, and this is where, our own Unitarian Sam could jump in, Trinitarians just tend to think of that as, because my sons are Homo sapien men, then the son of Paul must mean Homo sapien, and so the son of God must mean God. And I'm a Trinitarian. I'm not doubting that or trying to debunk that or skeptical about that. But it's a little shallow and simplistic, because what does it mean to be a son of God in the ancient world? Now, of course, it's a little bit different in Second Temple Judaism to make a claim like that. So there's that point, and you shouldn't forget that point. But today, to have Joe Rogan ask that, well, now suddenly we're back on the horns of, well, what do you mean by God? And God number two, sort of a super thing in the sky, it'd be God number two alone, or God number one, which is sort of pantheism, the Arenic God. And so my attention is, okay, what's in your imagination when you ask a question like that, or when you say Jesus, Son of God? Well, he can walk on water, and he can multiply loaves and fishes, and he can ascend into heaven by flying up into the air, and okay, but see, it's Son of God is very much dependent on what on earth do you mean by God, and I think Rogan is wrestling with that. And then what would it mean for God? What is the incarnation, and can we get our head around that? Does it mean that he's just completely unique human that had a vision of humanity and this way of educating people and spreading his ideology that would ultimately change the way human beings interact with each other forever? Yeah, that's a part of it. That's a big thing. And that's a part of it, because that's, even in the Roman world, which was pagan, that's what you would expect a son of God to be able to do. That's what you'd expect a divine prince to be able to do, to be able to change the course of human history, and Jesus clearly did. So what is he the Son of God? Well, are we all? There, are we all? So now we're getting into, there's been a lot of conversations. You're going to have to deal with Eastern religions, or even just Eastern Second Temple Judaism, Eastern imperial ideas about divinity, and what on earth do we mean by that word? That's another question, right? Do we all have that inside of us? Do we all have the ability to change everything around us inside of it? So now we're bumping into this deeply democratic impulse that we have, and it's deeply associated with good. And so it hardly seems fair that Jesus is the Son of God and I'm not. I should be the Son of God just like Jesus. Why don't I get to walk on water? Why don't I get to multiply loaves and fishes? Why don't I get to fly up in the air? And why don't people say things to me like, shall return to judge the living and the dead? And, I liked what... Good back. I liked what our own Han Shu had to say on Twitter too. The next biggest hurdle Christians face is when people turn it into a tool to get what they want, to operationalize it, to technologize it for the utility because it works. This again is the whole conversation about its rational value. It is to immanentize God. And now this is slightly different, because it's sort of the democratically immanentized God is... But that leads into this entire question about, okay, well, what about the presence of the Holy Spirit? And you will do greater works than these. And so clearly Rogan is thinking through big questions about this. Vervaeke says the future is theological. And The president of Joe Rogan certainly seems theological. Do all have that unique connection to the divine? Okay, well, connection to the divine. And again, you can understand this in lots of different ways. Pagans, of course, understood miracles. Who was I watching when it was? Oh, it was the same thing. It was Huff talking about miracles, and again, he did a great job. He did a great job. I could not have done a better job. No way. He did a far better job than I would. I mean, just because I'm not giving it all glory, laud, and honor doesn't mean I think he didn't do a great job. He did a great job. And again, the fact that this wasn't new, I think is a really important point, and even a good point, that Wesley Huff doesn't have some secret sauce that's going to somehow, make people pop. No, he's just giving them what's been around since I've been in seminary, a lot of it. What his perspectives, very similar to the perspectives that I learned in my biblical studies class at Calvin Seminary in the early 1980s. No, the late 1980s. I was in college in the early 1980s. I don't know. What does that mean? Just the fact that it's a question to ponder is a miracle in itself, in a way. Just the fact that there's this concept of this person that died for our sins as the Son of God. But you have to buy a bunch. You have to believe in a bunch of stuff to go there. Now, and this is so much what's right there, where there are a lot of people who I get the sense they would really love to believe, Alex O'Connor included, they would really love to believe, but they just can't authentically state that when they say these things and that they believe it, they don't feel like they're lying, and they feel like they have integrity, and they don't feel wholehearted about it. So there's just a lot of conflict in them. And it looks to be Joe's in the same place. Like, just the concept of that is interesting to people, because what it can do to people is offer them a very unique way to change the way they feel about the world itself. And so people are seeing, again, the utilitarian attraction of religion. And that's not a small thing culturally, because generally speaking, if people want to believe, the heart will usually find a way. Not always. And to follow that, I know a lot of Christians are hardcore Christians and some of the nicest people you ever want to meet. So does it work, right? Like, if you live like a Christian and you do follow the principles of Jesus, you have a richer, more love-filled life. So it's true, right? But if you have to submit to this concept that this guy was the child of God. Now notice, child of God moves slightly into a biological frame. Son of God can be a prince. An adopted children of God, let's say, as Paul talks about the Gentiles. But child of God, see, the materialism's still in there. We don't shed this stuff quickly. Who came down to earth, let himself be crucified, came back from the dead, explained a bunch of stuff for people, and then said, all right, see you when I come back. And you don't know how you can wrap your head around that particular claim, says Huff. And if he came back, here's the thing, if he came back, who the fuck would believe him today? With all the fake news and all the CGI and AI. And again, Rogan is trying to get his mind around this. And that's, of course, where apologetics, the kind that Huff was doing, pretty standard stuff, can be actually quite helpful. Because I can't get my mind around it, and someone that has credibility, someone that is sincere, someone who seems to be the kind of person that you can respect says, well, I don't know how you can get your head around it, but this is how I answer those questions. And it doesn't mean he'll just sort of say, yeah, me too, that's right, those are the answers. He'll just say, oh, okay. Because again, our volition, our beliefs are not a function of our volition. We can't just change our beliefs because we want to. And that's a good thing, because there's a lot of people who try to change their beliefs like they want to. Like, I really don't have to lose 20 pounds. No, I really should. I really imagine that I've got millions and millions of dollars in the bank and I can go on a shopping spree and buy everything I want to. No, I really can't. So it's important that our beliefs have a little distance from us. And so don't be too hard on people that are sort of in that middle space, they're wanting to believe something they can't quite achieve or get there. And there's no program for getting them there. And that's also a good thing, because if human beings were that easy to hack, we'd all be dead by now. So our difficulty in believing and our resistance to being colonized by others, those are features, not bugs, even though they frustrate teachers and they frustrate preachers and they frustrate politicians and they frustrate propagandists and they frustrate people in sales. No, it's a good thing we're this way, and it takes time, but this is a big deal. And then so he's trying to sort of imaginally participate in what the second coming would be like. And again, hey, fair enough, Joe. Fair enough. Guess I got my little proxy, Joe. Fair enough, Joe. All right. I think that's most of what I had to say about this. Yeah, that is. So, very interesting. So if you don't have time to watch 3.5 hours, just watch the last half hour. And if you're a Christian and you're sort of rooting for your tribe, well, that's the half hour you'll want to see. But I think that's also the half hour where we really kind of get to see where Joe Rogan's at. So there it is. Leave a comment.